Welcome to the Growing Green Ventures podcast, where we listen to stories from impact entrepreneurs. I'm extremely excited about this discussion with Joshua English, the founder and CEO of Structural Mycelium, otherwise known as Oakham Works Labs, a material startup making the only load-bearing mycelium-based material in existence called Zeroform. This composite is something that previously thought couldn't be created given mycelium's natural properties and tendencies to be foam-like and whatnot. Now, this innovation poses a direct replacement for load-bearing materials used in the building and construction sector. Now, in this conversation, we discuss, among other things, how his love of chairs, exposure to Buddhism, led him down his entrepreneurial journey, the challenges of growing a business affiliated with hemp, and of course, redefining the rules of business that makes stuff, not things, and what that entails, and so much more. Now, to give a big concept of the problem at hand, in the US alone, the building sector, including electricity to power those buildings, accounts for 34% of total domestic greenhouse gas emissions. Without electricity and powering those buildings, it's still 14% of domestic emissions. Cement alone, another integral load-bearing material used across the world in infrastructure and buildings and the like, accounts for a total of 8% of global emissions, which is critical to our growing economy. Now, lumber, a direct material substitute for Joshua's structural mycelium, accounts for approximately emitting 3.5 to 4.2 billion tons of CO2. That includes the paper and the pellets and the lumber that the wood industry produces. That's twice as much greenhouse gas emissions as Russia. I say all this to paint the picture of the problem that traditional building materials poses, and of course, highlight the opportunity that new innovative materials can solve for. I'm excited to dive into this conversation with Joshua and hear his take on his journey, and of course, the wonders of mycelium. Enjoy. For your time. We were really excited to have you on board. And before we get into everything, I'd love for you to give our listeners just a bit of a quick overview of what you do and a little bit more of your background.
Sure. Well, I'm an inveterate designer. I've been an artist and a designer my whole life. Mm-hmm. Even as a little kid, I thought about designing contraptions. I took apart all my toys. You know, I always thought being an inventor was the coolest thing. I would read, about Leonardo da Vinci. He was an artist and an inventor, and he was just like that kind of like mindset was just so like intriguing to me, and I just thought like that seems like a neat way to live. So I've always like had this insatiable thirst for learning for ways how things are made. How can you make them better? I've designed art. I've designed databases. I spent 18 years in healthcare. I'm designing large EMS systems and using data as like I took it as an art medium. It was applied to, helping, large populations be better served medically. But then I've also always had this infatuation with designing chairs, actually. And that led me to exploring mycelium-based composites because they seem to be kind of the cleanest material we could actually build our things with. And so I made an accidental discovery when I first started working with it, and that was about 4 years ago. And it's been a whirlwind since then because I had no intention of becoming mycelium guru, structural mycelium guru. It was a complete accident that led me down this rabbit hole.
That's what I find so interesting about your story is that you've come from all these different variables. You have all these references in your past, and then you've come up with what you're making now with this mycelium brick and products and whatnot. It's really unique. So to go back, what is your exact educational background, just so that everyone can know that?
Sure. I started out, I was at art school at Sonoma State. And that was definitely, that's how I identify myself. But I've also self-taught, database programming languages back in the 90s before big data was a thing, So I'm not one of those self-learners. I can open up a book and it's something that I love to just kind of keep learning. Gotcha. But then when I was in my healthcare career, most of the way through, I just started feeling like I was missing something about the creative side of my life. So I went back to school, went to Academy of Art in San Francisco, and studied interior architecture and design. And so that was where I really rekindled that, wanted to bridge that that pure artist in me with some kind of functional way to bring that out, and to apply that to the world. And so, as an interior architect and designer, my real focus though is on kind of the furniture and the things that we use in a space. I do love designing spaces, but I love designing the stuff that fills spaces too.
I love it.
Yeah.
Just to harp on that, why chairs? Like you've mentioned this interest in chairs. What specifically about chairs do you connect to?
It's one of those interesting tools that humans have created for themselves that have, back when the first chair was made, only the chief or the head of the clan would sit in the chair, and they held this certain, gravitas. And then after that initial klezmos chair, that very simple bench type of thing that was very suitable for nomadic cultures, when the four-legged chair was made, there was really no innovation on that front for thousands of years until the Bauhaus comes along and Marcel Brauer says, hey, let's bend some tubes. And he made a cantilever chair, and then everything else changed. And so, there even with those innovations, there have been very few true innovations in chair design. Yet you're sitting in a chair right now.
I am.
I have actually got one sitting next to me. I'm standing up right now, but like they're so useful. They're so ubiquitous in culture now. And it's just neat to think that you can make something that is so useful, but then also lends a certain handsomeness to a space as well. And it's neat, Yeah.
I'm assuming you've made other chairs in the past before. Did you, in the past, you must have experimented with a lot of different other materials. Is that fair to say? Or?
Yeah. My first love was wood. Learning carpentry as a young kid. It was just one of those things that I loved working with it. It's a wonderful medium to work with. But fast forward a bit, I've also had a period of time where I was really infatuated with concrete, actually. And I wanted to find ways to make concrete because it's so durable for furniture. If you could make furniture with it using small amounts, so durable that a chair that would normally last 5 years now can last 50 years because of the makeup of it. So one of my claims to fame was creating a steel and concrete chair that only weighed 42 pounds, actually. And
you'll have to send me some references after that.
I'll send you a picture of it.
I'm trying to picture what that looks like.
It looks a lot. It looks a lot like an animal. It was definitely. I get a lot of my inspiration from biology, and it definitely has this kind of sea creature or mollusk type of like look and feel to it. Cool. So yeah, happy to send.
Now you mentioned that you spent a lot of time in the healthcare industry, and obviously what you're doing now has a huge impact on reducing carbon emissions and obviously replacing materials in the building world that have a huge negative impact, let's say. Has caring for others, i.e. health, or doing good, i.e. for the world, been a big driving factor for you in the work that you've done overall, previous to mycelium and involvement?
Yeah, I think that it's, well, first of all, I have two parents who are two of the most compassionate, empathetic people that I know, and they've been, that nurturing, has always guided me in my adult life. And early on in my young adulthood, I became a Buddhist and started studying Buddhism, and have been a practicing Buddhist for over 30 years now.
Amazing.
And what that brings to the fore for me is that you can put others before yourself and not lose anything. In fact, you have everything to gain. And then when you take away the ego of, well, I'm gaining something from this, and just be happy in the stillness of just not being for myself, and that whole mindset is what really does drive what I do. I really hold true to that one very important Buddhist tenet of right livelihood. If we're doing the right things in life from a professional standpoint, then a lot of other things will follow. And so I found that to be true in my career in healthcare. I took it as a really important aspect of that, to not get burned out, to always find ways to be extremely compassionate. It's their emergency, not mine. I don't get bogged down in their, if it's a maybe it might not be that big of a medical emergency. Not my place to judge. It's
Okay.
to them it is. That's why they called 911. And so I always took that as kind of a key to how I treated people. And it's also how I try to treat people in general. And why, even as a designer, I think about, if I'm using a material, is it harming others? Is it, is it leather? Is it killing massive amounts of animals?
Yeah.
And in that process, is it also clearing away massive amounts of trees and ruining biodiversity on this planet? I couldn't abide by that kind of treatment of the biosphere. So yes, it's ingrained. It's a part of the fabric of my being, actually.
I love that. I didn't know that about you, Joshua. That's really cool, actually.
Yeah.
Joshua, you mentioned, obviously, right before this, ways that you find peace and your mindset toward the world. But obviously, everyone knows that being a startup founder and being an entrepreneur comes with a million different challenges and can stretch you thin in many different ways. I'm curious to know, from this time as an entrepreneur, how do you keep sane in your personal life? How do you not let the stress?
Going back to my Buddhist roots, there is meditation and breathing exercises just completely help to clear the slate. I do it every morning. I do it every night. And it's just one of those things that even in the middle of the day, when everything goes wrong in a day, we just have to remind ourselves that all of this is temporary anyways. I mean, we only have a few more million years with our sun before the whole darn solar system is gone. So even the solar system has a lifespan. So what we do at the end of the day only matters insofar as we treat each other with respect. And so I think it's always that grounding that helps. But you're right. I go through an emotional roller coaster that goes up and down about 4 times a day, and it's mind-bogglingly difficult at times. But then you have co-founders, you have friends and family, I have mentors, and I'm not ashamed to reach out to them and tell them my inner fears, because that fear, when you vocalize it, now becomes something that is tangible and can be folded up and put away or shaped into to motivation or something like that. And so it really is tapping into a network. And that's advice I would give to anybody who's thinking about going down the startup route, especially because startups are not small businesses or medium-sized businesses or even large businesses. These are small, non-existent things that then should become very large things. And there's even more of an emotional roller coaster on that type of ride. But I think anybody who wants to get into starting their own business has to keep remembering that you learn from mistakes, you learn from things that go wrong, and you also have to remind yourself that the highs are only highs and the lows are only lows, and it's how we only move forward through that middle passageway through those two things. And so when you get too high and you get too low, you've got to constantly be looking at ways to ground yourself. Luckily, the entities that I work with exist in the forest, which is one of my favorite places to be. And I do a lot of research in the field, actually, as a part of my work. And so now I have a reason to be communing in the forest with a lot of biology, and that also is very helpful. And the work that I'm doing has the potential to make a big impact, and so that also feels good. And there's people that are excited about it. So when I'm struggling, I just remember that, well, there's other folks that would like to see this, like for me to see this through. So
yes,
I can show up for at least this one more week. I just take it 1 week at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time. Yeah.
There's so much right there that I want to jump off of. And I think we can start from where you are now and actually work backwards. Because
Sure.
on your site, you have an amazing list of business advisors, material advisors, scientists, and the like. And then, of course, you actually have surrounded yourself with a team of people who are top tier in their sector and their field, but obviously complement your skill sets and complement the needs of this growing business. So, I'd love for you to take us through the story of how you, coming from this idea when you found out that this mycelium product can actually have load-bearing capacity and it has the potential to impact this sort of sector, how did you go from this idea to then speaking it into existence, into the world, and bringing people on board? How did you get those business advisors, and how did you get your co-founders on board as well?
Yeah, it's a little bit of mix of like they say success is kind of that mix of determination and luck, and so part of those earlier mentors that I brought on board were actually a function of my time at Academy of Art. It's a great school. There's a great alumnus network, and so when you come out of that school and you are motivated to do something in the field that you studied in, there's no shortage of people who are willing to step in and give you that help. So that was very helpful. The other thing is I've always, I've never had this awe for people who seem to have like status. Status is just nothing actually. And so I reach out to people, they'll either get back to you or they won't. And what I find is that if you have something interesting to say, if you have something that you're not just being a fanboy about something, and you actually say, hey, fill in the blank, I'm doing this. I would love to know your opinion. Can I send you a sample? Would you like to talk about the science? I want to run some stuff by you. What I found is that people are very willing to talk about these things. And so I ask anybody and everybody whom I think might be helpful, and the reception has been pretty fantastic. And so, yeah.
That's super. Yeah. I love that. That's great. I think it's you put good energy out there, and the world will reciprocate that in a positive manner.
I agree with that statement. Yeah.
Joshua, your story started not even started, but a point in your long story was working in the medical field, for example. And you had mentioned then you had a layoff, and that gave you the time and the space to really dig deep into this chair obsession of yours and experimentation with mycelium, and then that led off into the discovery of really where you are now. Can you give us a little bit more context into that time of your life? You got laid off.
Sure.
What was going through your head, and why did you choose to start?
Yeah, well, so I had that very long career in healthcare, and it was actually right after I graduated from Academy of Art, I started looking for jobs in the field. My family and friends were all saying, "What are you doing? You're I was at a pretty great place in my career and could have retired like in a handful of years after I made the jump." So I left that career to go into design full time. I got hired by a big design firm in San Francisco as a junior designer, but I was thankful that they put me on a lot of projects that I got to hone my skills in industrial design, designing benches, chairs, lamps, and things like that. And for a year, I was working at this studio, just felt like this is it,
cool.
And because of that job, my creative juices just started really flowing. So I wanted to start working more on those side projects, those freelance design projects, designing chairs for myself. That's when a friend of mine and I were at a workshop on concrete furniture design, actually. And we were talking about embodied carbon and how, just designers have no really good palette of materials. And he was the one that mentioned mycelium-based composites. It was really a parallel track. 2019, the end of 2019, if you recall, the pandemic hadn't been declared yet. We knew that in China there was this illness that was sort of going around. My 18 years in public health said, oh my gosh, it's already here.
Yeah.
So little did I know, though, that the design firm that I worked for, because they were a global design firm, got hit pretty hard early on in Asia and other places where they had entities. And so last one hired, first one fired, was the situation there. Oddly enough, the week before I got laid off, I had started my very first batch of of mycelium experiments. Midweek, mid-grow, it takes about 5 days, I get laid off. At the end of that week, I just decided I'm not going to let this get me down.
Yeah.
And maybe this is it. And what happened is the experiments that I laid down were not what I thought they were going to be. And I thought, oh my gosh, with a job and everything in place, this experimentation would be great.
Yeah.
Without a job, not so great. But I had a bunch of leftover material in that very first batch that I made. And so I had also this textile laying around from my days as a medic. It's actually bandaging type material, in which I incorporated with the leftover material. Put that up on the shelf because I didn't even take it seriously. It was like just leftover fun project.
And it's fermenting at this point, just to be clear. Like the mushrooms are growing, and I don't think fermenting is not the right word, but it's very apropos actually. And so it's the mycelium is actually colonizing through that. And at the end of that, so then laid off midweek, end of the 5-day period, 2 days into my layoff period, I have these samples. Most of them I could break in half with my hand. And then I had these other couple parts that I made that were totally different. And I was looking to the left and I was looking to the right and I was like, what happened? Why? Yeah. So I said, let's go big. And so then I designed a chair shell, built a chair shell with that same mistake technique. And that's when I knew, okay, not only can it make one part really nicely, but I can actually glue a bunch of these parts together. They adhere themselves together and they're still incredibly strong. And that led me on a whole different path in my life at that point. Interesting.
Yeah.
For everyone, just to understand a little bit more about mycelium, I'm from my understanding, and Joshua, correct me if I'm wrong, once you are able to grow it into the shape that you want, what a lot of these companies that are doing, that are making packaging or making insulation or X, Y, and Z, they heat the mycelium to stop it from growing.
That's correct.
At this point, when you said you glue things together, had you heated it? Had you stopped the mycelium from growing? Or when you say you put them together, I mean, I've seen structures where the mycelium grows together and locks into place effectively. Is that what we're talking about here? Or?
That's exactly what we're talking about. So one of the things we make nowadays are these flat panels here. Cool. This is 2 of those flat panels completely adhered together. You can't pull these things apart. To the mycelium, it just looks like lots of substratum and, oh, hey, you've got that scaffolding in between of the textile reinforcement phase there. And it locks all of that stuff together. That mycelial glue, if you will, it is incredibly strong. Of course, there's a certain limitation to that, but because of the way that it grows out from the particles and not being pushed through the particles, like normally we glue things together just on its surfaces and we rely on the glue almost whole, or we push glue through materials or cement through something or plaster through something and hope that it holds together. This, we inoculate the stuff we're trying to stick together. And then it grows from within, and that growth from within creates a very robust connecting joinery there, and it's quite fascinating too. That's the part of the exploration that gets really exciting because single parts are fantastic, but if we can create these into larger parts, it's great. One of the limitations of the biology, though, is that if you wanted to grow like a 1 foot by 1 foot cube of this material, the center of that cube would not grow very well because the oxygen gradient is gone in the middle. It needs oxygen to grow. So it'll just ignore the middle and then grow on the outside. That's problematic when you want it to be a nice solid block. Our technique overcomes that because we allow this capillary action of gas exchange and moisture exchange and other nutrients to exchange. And so we can create assemblies that are several feet thick, actually, and it doesn't matter. So there's really theoretically no limit to how big we can make these structures, and as long as we adhere to some certain simple rules about how we connect the parts and the constitution of those parts. The exciting thing that I'm seeing on the very near horizon for us is that demonstration of these larger assemblies. We make a lot of small assemblies. The largest assembly that we've made is a 2 foot by 2 foot cube, 8 inches thick, and so it's
wow.
Yeah, it's a big solid hunk. Grew completely through, fully colonized. It was really exciting to get there, and so now we're really trying to just perfect that technique right now.
Joshua, there's so many positive components to mycelium alternatives compared to the traditional sectors that they're displacing, whether that be normal leather, whether that be insulation, whether that be plastic packaging, or whether this be, in your case, timber or concrete and whatnot. What I'm curious to know is, you created a material, you created a product effectively, and then what? Did you find the solution that you created this business model around? Most of the times I hear people do the opposite, right? They find a problem and they try to solve for that, and then build a business around that situation. Can you give me some thoughts on this, and
Sure.
how has that been challenging to create an active business model around something that you basically have this formulation intact, and trying to find problems that this addresses?
Yeah. Well, when I made that first discovery that day, I went from abject, depression to elation. Like, well, this is hopeful. I had to sit with it for a day, and I really just kind of had to really meditate on it, quite frankly. And it really came to me. This is stuff, not things. And so it's one of those things where I kind of was looking into where are some examples. Well, 3M is a great example. They make stuff, not things, but with the stuff that they makes things better. So others can dream up, hey, we can use Gore-Tex for rain jackets, for tents, for fill in the blank, for boots, shoes, backpacks, whatever it is. So many different form factors. But in the beginning, it was some scientist that goes, well, this is cool. This little square of stuff is really great. What things can we make? I realized I was in a little bit of a different boat, because not only was it just this new stuff, there wasn't a lot of background science to support its, use as a material. It's a very brand new field of study. And secondly, there's a lot of mycophobia, or fear of mushrooms, if you will. And so when people hear, wait, you're making what? Out of what? Out of fungus? What? Out of is it mold? What is this? Is it going to make me sick? Is it going to grow a mushroom out the side? So I realized that I had to think of some initial, proofs of concept of that. As I mentioned, I was really looking to just make a chair that first, go round. But what I realized is that, okay, as ubiquitous as chairs can be in the built environment, because this material is so strong, and it was just anecdotal at that point, but because there was some strength to it that I was not counting on at the time, I started to immediately think, well, I wonder if this could hold up a building. I wonder, I had parts like this one, and I hit them. I'd be like, well, I wonder, can this replace lumber? I mean, so I started asking around in the mycelium-based composite community. Everybody said, cute little kid, that's not what you have. Structural is a very high bar to get to. And so I wasn't discouraged, though, because I knew what I was feeling. I knew what I had in my hand. And reminder, it was pandemic time, now full blown. Pandemic was declared 2 weeks after my discovery. So I can't send things places. I can't go places. It's all Zoom and emails and things. And me in my lab. And I had those wonderful months to be very antisocial and be in my lab. And that's where I started cooking up, well, if I grow them together like this, maybe I can make some big wall panels. If I grow them together like this, maybe I can make some large columns that could be used as concrete forms. I just started thinking about all the different ways I could form them, so that then I could come up with a business case. As you probably know, though, the folks that finance these types of startups always have this one admonition: do one thing and do it well. And I always thought that was kind of a cockamamie thing. Why? Because it's like, well, if you only do one thing and you fail, well, what else do you got? So having a plan B and a plan C that's not a bad business strategy. So I've always kind of shook my head at that notion. But conversation after conversation after conversation with VCs and angels in the beginning, you seem to be all over the place. Don't you want to make a chair? Do you want to make a wall? Is it a lumber replacement? What is it? And I would say, yes, it's all of those things. You don't see that? And so I have reached that frustrating level of folks saying you need to focus, and then having more conversations with them and saying, boy, it doesn't seem like you've thought about enough of this stuff. And I was like, man, that's what I've been saying the whole time. Gosh. So that has been difficult, mainly because there's this mindset that VCs I know want to do the right thing. That's why there are a lot of climate-related VCs, and even non-climate-related VCs are starting to try to think more in terms of climate impact.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they're still using old paradigms of cash exits. That does not equate to climate tech. Climate tech needs to be measured in carbon atoms, not in cash. Cash, I think, will come. If you have a really good idea and you can do it for cheaper, you can do it, scale it and do it repeatedly, that's truly disruptive. And that's where I feel we need to be thinking about climate tech, is that let's throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, I mean. And the VCs are not quite there yet. They always ask, where's my exit? And I go, well, this is a building material. If you don't want it to fall on your head, we should probably do some pretty rigorous science here in the next few years to get there. And that kind of runway is also another difficulty for climate tech VCs or even traditional VCs. So yeah, it's been a difficult row to hoe, but I'm dogged about it. I want to stay in that realm of, if you don't get the climate, if you don't get the carbon side, obviously we're not going to meet in the middle on the cash side. So it's okay. I'll just eat rice and beans and just grin and bear it while until we get there.
I think, Joshua, you're bringing up a really important point, which is finance, right? And financing not only the entity, but financing you as an individual, because you still got to pay for those rice and beans. And I think that this is a part of the entrepreneurial journey that often gets overlooked because of social taboos against money. So I'd love to ask you 3 questions around money and, let's say, allocation of personal resources that that really impact the entrepreneurs, your journey, but obviously any entrepreneur's journey. So first and foremost, you talk about you using this lab, getting to this lab to use the mycelium. How did you get access to a lab? Where did you start? How does that happen? How do you just have access to a scientific lab that can ferment mycelium in?
I've had to kind of create everything from whole cloth. My first lab was my garage. And then the pandemic became in full swing. I decided to relocate down to Southern California, where my family was. And when the first openings were happening and we were able to get back out there, I started looking for a shop space. So I found a really nice, clean shop space that I could work out of. It was interesting. I sent them the first rent check. They cashed it. I sent them the second rent check. It didn't get cashed. And then when it was time for the third rent check, I sent it. They didn't cash that one. And I called them at that point. I said, hey, you didn't cash my last 2 checks. Am I sending them to the right place? And they said, oh my gosh, we forgot to tell you. They got here, but we don't care. Do you work out of this space? We love what you're doing. We think that what you're doing can be very helpful. We don't need this space for another year. Have at it. And I was, wow, okay. So I got a year of free. Now, this is not typical. Your mileage may vary, quite frankly, and this is not typical entrepreneurship. This is not what you put in textbooks.
This is not what you should expect to happen. No.
This is that intersection of luck and opportunity.
Truly.
I got that lucky break, and I took that opportunity to just dive into it. I spent morning, noon, and night at that shop because that entity, that shop, was the thing. And so I took full advantage of that year. That's when I made those parts that went off to testing, that showed the structural capabilities. It was those folks that gave me that little leg up. It wasn't worth much, actually, you think about a year's commercial rent, and it came out to around $36,000 that they just said, they did no questions asked. They didn't ask for equity, nothing. They just said, please do some good work.
Yeah.
And that's what
And
I tried to do. And
you answered that question thoroughly.
yeah,
You did that
yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. Okay, so at this point though, you get this amazing opportunity. You're having
Hmm.
this space that you're able to work out of and really experiment in, and that's so
Hmm.
fundamental to the foundation of this idea that you have. What was going on in your personal life at the time in terms of, yeah, I mean, you said you're working there morning, days, and nights. Did you have a job? You were laid off, or were
Yeah,
you able to get some sort of income elsewhere, or were you living off of your savings this whole time? Tell us
yeah.
more about this.
Yeah, definitely spent every little penny of savings that I had. I've put about 160 or so thousand of my own dollars into this.
Okay.
That's what kept us afloat. And I say us. At that point, it was me and my dog. That
This
was
is the
it.
beginning of the year. This is that 2000. This is 2020.
2020,
Free rent.
2021,
Gotcha.
2022 were really kind of self-financed, and
Yeah.
through the benevolence of friends and family who,
Okay.
would my parents let me stay at their house, so I didn't
Okay.
have to worry about that. I was
Mhm.
that 40-year-old guy, well, actually 46 at the time, living at the parents' house. But, the whole family kind of was rallying around like, all right, well, you left your career. We told you not to, but this idea seems cool.
Yeah.
So let's help out a little bit. And it was definitely that friends and family help that was
Interesting.
key. That
Yeah.
is entrepreneurship 101.
Mm.
If you have friends and family that can help, it's also life skills 101. Never burn bridges, because you're going to need those later on. You never know when they'll come in
Indeed.
handy. So
Indeed.
yeah,
Indeed. No,
yeah.
that's a really good point. How did you deal with, and this is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently in terms of the business landscape and the
Mm.
individual landscape in the United States. I mean, did you not have insurance? How did you
Uh,
cope with that?
yes. So in my personal life, you asked that question. I kind of skimmed over it. I was actually right before the pandemic hit.
Uh,
I was in a second marriage, actually. So
okay.
I have two sons. They're both grown from my first marriage.
Mhm.
They're one's graduated from college and in the workforce. The other one's in college right now. But I had a second marriage that was sort of, it was ending, and
Okay.
it's very amicably ended. It was one of those things where we just realized we had just drifted apart. No harm, no foul. It was both of our second times.
Understood.
So, in that personal life, we decided to not use lawyers. We didn't want to do anything. So we did a DIY divorce,
Yeah.
which took us years to complete.
Yeah.
So thankfully, I was still able to keep the health insurance that we had, and she was more than happy to keep that, and to pay for that. So because of that, that helped through all that
Wow.
time without insurance and things like that. Because as somebody who's spent a long time in healthcare, I know what it means to be uninsured, and to know what the impact of the
Yeah.
uninsured has on the system in general. So yeah,
Yeah.
those things were top of mind. Again, that was pure luck. That was just, not burning bridges, and then
Not
having
not
good
burning
luck.
bridges. That's a very diplomatic way of saying it. Indeed, indeed. Joshua, there's a lot more. I'd love to learn more about the actual
Hmm,
structure that you're doing and the business that you're building, because within
sure.
mycelium, mycelium and mycelium derived products are becoming really popular, and there's
Yeah.
actually a lot of hype around them, one could say.
Yeah.
When you're looking at the implementation of mycelium in packaging, in leather, insulation, building materials, and the like, even food alternatives, right? Where do you see the most success in? And
Mhm,
what lessons do you take from those verticals and those
mhm,
specific sectors that you are now applying into this building space around based off of mycelium?
mhm. It is a small world of folks, and all of those other companies.
Hmm.
We pretty much all know each other. We
Hmm.
talk with each other. One of the difficulties is scaling. How do you mycelium? When you grow them, they have to start small, and you grow these ever larger units of this material. But each time you go through it, though, that massive mycelium has to be broken up, and that's difficult. Every time you touch
Hmm.
it, it can get infected. So learning from how those businesses have scaled or failed at scaling is also important.
Hmm.
Um, the most successful company also happens to be the company started by the guy who started all of this, Phil Ross. He was an artist at Stanford. He was finishing up some master's work at Stanford in art. And he was just an avid mycologist. He grew mushrooms, but he had always noticed that these blocks were like something else. And so he started making really funky, weird art with that stuff way back in the day. Fast forward, he started this company, MycoWorks, which makes, as you mentioned, that leather alternative.
Yeah.
And his very deep knowledge really kept him pushing forward through a lot of the pitfalls that you could reach in this business. He's made a lot of the mistakes for us, and then has been very open and sharing with those mistakes and how he's overcome them. So that's helpful. And his company right now just opened up right across the border from where we're at in Union, South Carolina, a quarter scale factory to make massive amounts of this leather replacement. And so that's really exciting. I think something like the next 7 years of their inventory has already been purchased. That's how exciting and
they are hard to
groundbreaking
get involved.
it is.
They are hard to get access to. I know that from firsthand experience. Yeah,
they've already, because it's all sold for for years to come. Yeah, for years to come.
Yeah.
But what they all said to me though in the beginning when I said, hey, I really do think that this can serve in structural capacities, all of those folks, Phil, Ecovative, the guys at Ecovative, the folks in Biome, Mogu, everybody kind of wanted to do stuff with building materials in mycelium-based composites. And there was a lot of researchers that jumped on it in like 2013 through 2019 and started researching the qualities, the capabilities. At the end of the day, they kept coming back with the notion, though, yeah, but you can't build buildings out of foam, very foam-like material.
Yeah.
It has great qualities for sound and thermal mitigation, but previous formulations have a really big problem with water uptake. So some formulations can be 600% water uptake, which is, that's not good.
No.
It's like basically sponges,
Yeah.
Where, my material actually can hover around 30% water uptake, which is acceptable, not great. There's still some work to be done on that front. But all of those folks really in the early days just said, gosh, building materials is just such a long road. Don't do it, man. Find a product that you can make and just make that and be happy. And then we'll just leave it for the next generation. I just said, no, somebody's got to stick a stake in the ground. I think we've got a pretty good mousetrap here. I'm going to, if nobody else is going to ride this bus line, I'm going to get on it and be the only weirdo riding that bus from the top of the state to the bottom of the state. I'm going to get there, and here we are, almost 4 years into it. The journey is halfway done for this, and so I'm glad that I had that opportunity to do so. That wouldn't, now, mind you, it's come with a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of like hair pulling out, a lot of, I don't think I can go on anymore, but here I am. And I feel, as motivated now as I did on day one and with some momentum now. And that's been helpful because building materials should take that kind of time. Like I mentioned, you don't want these buildings to fall in your head. Yeah. So when we put stuff into a building, you better know what its capabilities are. And our research was showing that the qualities that they had studied before are vastly different from the qualities that we were measuring with our material. And so we started reaching out to these researchers who were working in with those earlier formulations and saying, hey, would you like to take a look at the material as we make it? And let's see if we can coalesce a new kind of bevy of data to show some new capabilities of it.
It's really interesting what you bring up, because I think this is the overarching theme, or a overarching theme within these, let's say, eco solutions or replacements for traditional materials that are otherwise very carbon intensive and have a net negative impact. Building materials within the world of building, obviously, this is a lot of regulation that has to be for right reasons, need to be put up to code and whatnot. What your material offers an amazing solution, because it doesn't have it's not carbon intensive to create and has the same as a load bearing capacity as its traditional alternatives, right? So at the beginning of life, at the early stages of life, it's very low carbon intensive. To fit to code, to be usable in in buildings and whatnot, would you have to make a lot of treatments or coatings that prevent it from being set on fire, or water permeability and the things of that nature, or any other variables that go into building codes that I'm not familiar with, that would negatively impact its end of life in solution? Because a lot of the stuff that you're making is all organic. Maybe it can be composted.
Yeah.
But if you have polymer derived coatings and whatnot, maybe that ruins its end of life solution. So I'd love for you to speak on that.
Sure. Yeah, and it's one of those things where if I ever did find that, it's great, but then you got to plaster it with plastic resin or something like that, and it's like, I'd probably like drown this baby a long time ago. But that's not the case. And every time I think about these problems, a solution seems to come at hand. Plus, I mentioned that the qualities of the material when it grows like this, like we make it, tends to have a different outcomes than previously known. So the fire, sound, and thermal mitigation, all kind of, that's just the natural inherent qualities of using biogenic materials and a mycelium binder. The mycelium, when it can grow with the kind of stiffness that we can grow it with, also has more durability than typical mycelium-based composites and other biogenic materials as well. I think about this a lot, actually. And a friend of mine, Dr. Dr. Andrew Dent at Material Connection, one of his big things is we need to find ways to make larger assemblies from monomaterials. And so if I can make a wall with a stud in it that's made out of this material and sheathing that goes on each side, same material, it doesn't need to be glued together or even really mechanically fastened together. Can we make wall sections that are prefabricated? Then when you get it to a job site, the only kind of finishing that would have to happen is what you would typically do. We would prefer things vapor open, like lime plasters and stuff like that, but that's not always beneficial for the use of certain types of spaces. So it can take paint, it can take all of those types of coatings and coverings, and normal building science applies. You wouldn't leave your framing lumber exposed, because that then causes issues with wetness in the building and sick building syndromes and things like that. So you'd protect it a lot of the same ways. But even if you had to paint on the outside of it, it then becomes an easy thing to peel off, and then you still have this. I mean, I joke around. This is edible. It's not palatable, but it's edible. And so if you can easily peel off a coating, and then it's now either we can take it back. Unheard of in the building materials industry. Normally it leaves the door and they want to act like, what? We make bricks? No, we don't. Who said that? And they're like, where do we take these and when we're done with them? I say, bring it back to us, because we can chop it up and feed it to the next generation. Or, like you mentioned, compost becomes a viable alternative at that point. And so really also then it becomes, while we're designing the methods, while we're designing these initial proofs of concepts for products, a new paradigm that's really trying to make its way into the mainstream is this whole concept of a design for disassembly. And I think that this material is tailor-made for things like that, because we can take up such large swaths of real estate, pun intended, within a building, where you can say, hey, if instead of studs, metal, lumber, whatever it is, and instead of insulation and gypsum board, nails, screws, all the things, glues, tapes that go along with that. What if it was just this one monomaterial in the middle? So now the disassembly becomes so much easier. That's been kind of the key focus. Is we want people to make things out of this stuff as much as possible. We'd like it to be long-lived products, so that becomes sort of the mindset is, let's lock it somewhere for a very long time. Then in the walls, that's great, because it's an address, we can verify that. It becomes a very high-value carbon credit, if you will. And then at the end of its useful life, these types of GIS systems are now pretty apropos, where they can say, well, we know that these building materials are in this city grid here. Well, there's a lot of mycelium-based composite stuff over there. Oh, and that building's about to get torn down. Guess what we have a lot of now? We have a lot of precursor for the next generation. So it really does revolve around this design for disassembly. And sure, there are things that have to be added to the built environment to make it durable and long-lived. But those things should be fairly easy to remove as long as we're using fewer and fewer materials. The longer the bill of goods are for any kind of building system, the more difficult it is to disassemble and reuse that stuff.
Naturally.
If we're using a very short bill of goods, then it's easy. What bin does this go in? It all goes into that bin, and just send it there. That's kind of the concept we're trying to promote.
What's interesting about this concept of design for disassembly and just focusing on the end of life is that we're simplifying it for us if done well and done effectively, right? Instead of having all these millions of polymers and mixed materials coming together that are just going to end up in landfill, having this simplified space and simple materials is going to do us really good. You mentioned something before this call that I'd love to harp back on, which is really the choice of hemp as your biocomposite, right? Because obviously the base of this is a mycelium network of cells and roots and things of that nature to sort of bind everything together, but it's binding hemp herd, correct?
That's correct.
From an outsider's perspective, right? Hemp is, while a growing business, I mean, the U.S. creates so much more corn and soy and wood waste. Let's say why did you choose hemp, which is technically, I guess, still illegal in parts of the country?
It's actually fully legal to grow industrial hemp.
Okay, across the United States, all 50 states.
All 50 states.
Nice.
It's just one of those things about the inspection regimes become kind of onerous. The silly thing is that smokable cannabis, CBD cannabis, and industrial hemp are three very different species of the cannabis plant. You can smoke an entire barn full of industrial hemp and you just won't get high. You'd die from smoke inhalation is what would happen. And so the fact that they are lumped in with things that are ingested like CBD or smoked or ingested like other cannabis products, THC related products, there's just not that same bugaboo. So that stigma still remains. It's really hard to get a bank account, actually, if you mention anything about hemp. It's actually.
Have you found that to be the case for your business?
Oh yeah, in the very beginning, it was impossible. I was like, had some investors that were about to give me some cash, and I was looking for a better business banking partner, and I had 3 banks tell me no. I had to actually pay $200 a month to a small bank in the Midwest that was specializing in that problem solve.
Interesting.
But it was like, gosh, I'm a startup. I can't afford $200 a month. But it was all the bank that was the only bank that would give us an account at the time. That's since changed, but it's still quite difficult. But there, so in Europe, in China, hemp has had a long history, and it never derailed. The French hemp industry has been a really shining example of how well that kind of industry can support itself and can support the farmers and the offtake and the use of those materials. In North America, we're having to relearn something that was very American. I mean, George Washington grew hemp. It was considered your patriotic duty to grow hemp because of its usefulness in so many things. What the farmers knew at that time too is that if you grew hemp on your land, not only did it give you these very valuable products, but your land was better. There was better water retention. It had more nitrogen in the land.
Better soil,
and so
everything.
it's that regenerative quality that the plant has that makes it so special. People get kind of gaga over it, but the truth is that for me, the objective science surrounding it is actually way more interesting than the kind of wooey, stuff. I'm a hippie, so trust me, I get it. I go in for all of that stuff, but I'm also a pragmatist and a scientist at heart, and that's. To me, it's the objective facts around the plant that make it so wonderful, and because I'm a systems thinker, so when I think of our material, immediately I wanted to worry about the raw material. So, not having known anything about hemp at the time in 2020, I started researching it. Is hemp actually going to be okay? They were just now, the first trials were being grown, and the industry was like a tiny little baby at that point, and it's grown so fast in the last 4 years. And then come to find out, you learn all these things about this, backed up by science, backed up by research, and you think to yourself, well, this is fantastic. It's not like I made this discovery, we're using hemp, but come to find out, hemp uses like 50 times more water than the average plant crop, and it rapes the soil of all of the goodness, and then it kills birds and babies, along the way, no. Not at all. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. It's almost like one of those things. Is this really too good to be true? Sometimes I feel like it's a fever dream almost. The positivity that when you join hemp with mycelium, you kind of have this like super group there. Yeah, and it's like I said, you could get kind of hippy dippy about all of it and say hemp and mycelium, hemp and fungi are going to save the world, and they just may. But we have to be pragmatic, because in materials science, in design, you have to be honest with your materials. You have to know what materials are capable of and what they are not capable of, and use them appropriately. And so that's where I think the whole mindset is starting to evolve, is where should and can we use hemp? Where can and should we use mycelium? Where can and should we use the two of them? And then where we can't use hemp with mycelium, well, then what other problem can we solve? For instance, there's a company in Ohio, Red House Studios. They're doing a project in Africa, and they're taking an invasive species, the encroacher bush, and they're doing massive remediation projects, taking that biomass, growing edible mushrooms with them, high protein food sources, and then taking those spent mycelia, crushing them down into very strong bricks.
Cool.
That is one of the most wonderful examples of circularity I've ever seen in my whole entire life. And so that's possible too. Here in the South, there's the kudzu, that kind of crawls over everything. There's ways to take care of these waste products or these invasive species, and it just has to have anywhere from 17 to 21% lignin, 20 to 30% cellulose and hemicellulose, and the fungus is happy. So it's at the end of the day, if the chemistry is right, if the substrate is right, the fungus really doesn't care. And so we can solve a lot of agricultural residue problems by doing, by making them into building materials. So it's not just hemp, but hemp does have those wonderful regenerative qualities that make it really exciting. One of the things that we found is that on an acre of farmland growing industrial hemp, we can grow 4 to 6 times more building material than can be extracted from an acre of forest. That means that for every acre of hemp that we grow and make into mycelium-based composites in the future, let's say we figured out the scaling thing, and we're now making this in large scale.
Full production, yeah.
For every acre of hemp that's grown to supply this, or any other agricultural residue that's being used as opposed to lumber products, that means there's 4 to 6 acres of forest that is being preserved and does not have to be denuded of its most important carbon resource. And so there's those follow-on effects of you're supporting biodiversity in a far field in a forest. You're preserving these forests, which have, there's like 1% of forests on the planet are left intact. The boreal forest is being mowed down right now. Actually, if people knew the rate at which they are clear cutting the boreal forest, starting in BC and heading east, everybody would be up in arms. It's a soapbox that I've been on for years, and so I think about those follow-on effects. If we could find true alternatives, and I don't think you should really raise a stink until you actually have an alternative, because the people who are cutting down trees are like, well, we need them. Stop. If the population wasn't increasing, if we didn't need more buildings, well, we wouldn't need to do this. True. So if we can find those real alternatives, then perhaps we can actually incentivize, and this is part of changing the paradigm of business, which also makes VCs kind of nervous when I talk this way, is I don't care to be a billionaire at all. It sounds like an atrocious thing to be, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think of a business that is scalable, it's one that is scalable because it doesn't forget that which you have displaced. So can we share the promise of the economic benefits with the forest industry and say, hey, what if we, from our profits, were able to pay you to actually regenerate those forests that you've mowed down?
Mm-hmm.
It's much safer work. It could be much more enjoyable work. It's certainly more palatable from a climate perspective to regenerate forests as opposed to mowing them down. So what if, I like to ask these questions of what if. A lot of people go, it's too much. And then some people go, wait a minute, you might be onto something there. What if you shared profits with the timber industry? Happy to do it,
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they probably would fight that kicking and screaming. But again, I think it's when we can think as a globe, as kind of this eusocial animal, like E.O. Wilson put it, like where we are one organism, the human race. And here, if we start to think about benefit for all, that includes, like I mentioned, for those who we have also displaced. That's kind of unheard of in business. Normally, it's like, hey, you displace somebody, nice, man, good on you.
Yeah.
It's like, no, there's people, families, children who relied on those people's jobs to go into the forest and do these things. So forgetting about that and ignoring that is problematic and not, I think, emblematic of the new mindset. What I find among climate tech startups is sort of this kindred spirit in that notion of let's share. There's more than enough to go around.
I think sharing and in the way that you say it, and sharing in a sense of a reallocation of resources on a collective level, that wasn't the case in the 20th century, and it isn't necessarily the case in a traditional company that a traditional VC wants to scale up, right? The thing about climate tech in a way is that it's refocusing on the physical in a way that SaaS, traditional tech, big tech, X, Y, and Z just doesn't operate in, and when VC puts this money into a business model like that, it's expecting a scalability. It's expecting a rate of return that a company, not saying that yours can't, but it's just not in the same structure, and it won't result in the same thing. And so really the scale of the problem that we have requires thinking like you are executing on, like what you're showing, which is systems thinking, which is a collective thinking, which is an approach to collective behavior that the status quo, let's say, isn't really opposed to. Joshua, I agree with everything that you're saying. I just want to acknowledge you for you being a maverick and being a pioneer in this sector and pushing the boundaries. Not only are people saying, don't focus on building materials, it's too hard. You say, screw that, and you keep on going. People come back at you and say your business model is off. You're not able to scale. I want to see money now. You say, no, let's think about things in a different manner. You push things forward, and that's really the mindset that we need to have. And other entrepreneurs who are thinking about, what can I do to address this problem? What can I do with my own skill sets and putting them forward? I just think it's really admirable, and I acknowledge you for that. You've been working really, really hard for the last couple of years, and you obviously will continue for time in the near future. Where do you see your organization headed to? What does success for Oakham look like in 5 years' time? And then what does success look like for Joshua on a personal level within that 5 years' time as the founder, as the champion of this product invention?
It's a fantastic question. It's actually obviously one that I think about a lot, especially in the down times when I'm like, gosh, is there an end to any of this?
5 years is not the end line. 5 years is still the beginning.
Right.
You got it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's still, it's like Einstein said, or it's attributed to him that we can't, solve our problems with the same thinking that got us into it. Like you mentioned, the Industrial Revolution was all me first and the gimme gimmes, and that's where we got. Jack Welch told us, profit before anything else, and then, let's streamline. Humans be damned. Now we're realizing that that's not the case, and so. That's, all that aside. For me, success then looks like ubiquity. Success looks like this material is a replacement for drywall. This material is in your buildings. This success looks like an entire government saying, for our buildings, the interior partitions. If we're building new construction, the load-bearing walls are going to have this material in it. And so we, as a business model, our business model is based on licensing. We don't want to be global manufacturer of anything.
Interesting.
Like I mentioned, we want to take that 3M mindset of let's make the stuff and let's let other people make the thing. So success in 5 years for us is we've figured out a way to manufacture this at scale. We've designed the machines, we've designed the processes and built the network of raw materials that are necessary. We've been supportive of the hemp industry and the farming community so that we have access to the raw materials that are necessary here. And that we have stood up, in 5 years, let me put out a number here, 20 licensees making this material at scale in various places around the world, North America, I don't care where, just that it is there. And to me too, at that point, our material has been awarded a patent from the U.S. Patent Office, and
congratulations.
That's a lot of
congrats.
Yeah, thanks. It's kind of a lot of the me first and the gimmies mindset can be used for that, because effectively now we have a monopoly on this process for 30 years. You can do good or you can do bad with that, and we want to open source this because we do want that ubiquity, and that's the thing that I think the mindful VCs that are getting the carbon before cash thing, they see, gosh, boy, so you need to solve X, Y, and Z, and then we can make this in mass, and then they see that ubiquity becomes, you make 3 cents on every part over 300 million parts. That's a pretty good return. So it's a little bit, of a longer runway there to get there. But there's the one thing about climate tech that I know to be true is that, especially with the very, very good ideas, is that because they are truly disruptive, people throw that word around a lot because it's innovative and it's different and it's thinking in a different direction, but it's not truly disruptive unless it's actually done cheaper. So a lot of folks that I know that are working on this hard tech, like you mentioned, it is truly disruptive because at the end of the day, sure, right now it's hard to do, but if we solve these really small manufacturing issues, then there is a lot of money to be made. At that point, I just need a small studio space somewhere where I could paint and sculpt all day long. That's what success looks like to me.
Man.
Focusing on my art again. Yeah.
I love that. Well, I hope.
And then actually to add on to that a little bit too, as a company, we want to continue the R&D. We want to be the hub for knowledge around how do you apply mycology for the built environment. And then once we've gotten to a point where that's been going, maybe some other kind of biological system we can bring our experience to bear on that and help, bring other companies along who want to use these types of technologies and build that infrastructure that the scientist / entrepreneur needs to bring these really great ideas to market. So many of them die on the vine in the valleys of death of just that initial idea to proof of concept, that proof of concept to scaling. That's where everybody dies, as a startup. And so we see our benefit to the world as being able to further the knowledge base, not making a gajillion units of something ourselves, but allowing others to make bajillions of them, mega gigajillions of them. And then in turn, every single time we put one of these things into a building or onto a boat or into a buoy or an airplane, whatever, that is a massive amount of carbon atoms being stored for a long amount of time that cuts down that carbon cycle. What success looks like to me is a 2030 with a bright future looking to 2050. 2050 thinking, that could have been bad.
Yeah.
Thumbs up. That's what success is a future to 2050 and beyond.
I hope I only wish success for you then, for all of us. So
Awesome.
Joshua, I really thank you for your time, and this has been an amazing conversation. And great to sort of dig deep into your business and obviously just who Joshua English is as a person. You have a fascinating history, and I can speak just for myself. I met Joshua at a Climate Week event a month ago or so, and your energy is infectious, and your interest in this space is really apparent. So I just want to again acknowledge you for that. Any last words you want to say to the people, or is there anything that where can people find you? Where can people find your work at? I'd love to know.
Sure.
And links will be in the description as well.
Yeah, sure. Structural Mycelium is probably the easiest way. So structuralmycelium.co or .com, it all goes to the same place, but we like .co. Structuralmycelium.co is our main website. We don't do social media. Find us on LinkedIn, Occamworks Labs on LinkedIn, or you can find me on LinkedIn. And then what I'd like to leave people with is we've known the doom and gloom for a long time. If you know of somebody who's trying to help them, you know. If you know of an entrepreneur who's struggling just to buy beans and rice, buy him some beans and rice, you know. Give them a place to work in. You know, if you've got an extra building, give them a place to work. What is it? It was going to sit empty. So give it to a climate tech company, you know. Be thoughtful enough to think about, what can I do? You can do little things, and that makes a big difference. And you could do big things if that's your capacity too. And don't give up. But the true soapbox that I would like to get on is for everybody to realize that 9.5 out of every 10 acres of forest that is cut down right now is cut down using clear-cut methods. That might be alarming to a lot of people, but it's the truth, and it's a sad fact. And
can you elaborate on what clear-cut means for the audience?
Sure. That is cutting down every single tree in a swath of area. And some people go, oh, but let's get FSC certified lumber or PEFC certified lumber. Well, guess what? Those rules allow for clear cutting as long as you leave buffer zones in between the clear cuts. So what does the industry do? They just design their industry around these buffeted zones. And so when you fly overhead of these heavily forested areas, you see these pockmarked, you know, clear cutting zones. The problem with that, and even so what they call thinning operations can cut down up to 75% of trees in an area. So yeah, that's some pretty serious thinning when you've cut down most of a forest. And then they grow back plantations. Tree plantations are not forests. It's a single species of tree usually that's grown and then cut down year after year. When you cut down an acre of forest, that acre of forest becomes an emitter of carbon, about 83 tons of carbon per acre per year for the next 15 to 20 years. The true LCA analysis of the timber industry shows that the timber industry is responsible for about 3.5 to 4.3 gigatons of carbon emissions per year. They've been able to kind of move around that notion because they've been able for a long time to say, hey, trees are made of carbon. So every time we put a tree in the built environment, no harm, no foul. We're just storing carbon, right? The problem is that you're cutting down a perfectly good forest that was doing well enough, drawing down carbon, and could continue to do that for years to come. So we're cutting down the lungs of the earth and thinking that somehow the earth is going to survive without the ability to breathe. It's ridiculous. Plus, it's totally damaging biodiversity. And a very sad fact is that we've demonized forest fires. But forest fires have been a part and a necessary part of forest ecosystems for millions, hundreds of millions of years. And so to take that away is, first of all, damaging on its own. The solutions that we have in place, these thinning operations, actually exacerbate the problem. And so there's a really great book by Dr. Chad Hansen called Smokescreen. Highly recommended. Please pick it up. It's revelatory. And then there's some really current research. I'll send you the links to these so that people can have access to these. The recent papers on the true carbon costs of the forestry industry is quite alarming. And so when people tell you wood is good, let's build skyscrapers out of wood, you have to stop and think, that math doesn't seem to add up. It doesn't. We can't cut down more trees and solve our problems. We're actually, it's going to be this cynical money grab for the timber industry, but it's going to get us nowhere in 2030 and 2050.
Yeah.
And so I highly encourage people to educate yourself on the true costs of the timber industry. And let's find ways to help it evolve. Maybe the timber industry can just get better at regenerating forests. And then I would pay monthly to a private company if that's what they were doing. I would send them checks as if it was like my church, and I'd tithe to a company that regenerated forests. I don't care what their past was. Maybe they cut down all the forests, but if that's their focus now, I'd be all for it. And it's, I'm not, ashamed to just say that every chance I get to speak to any audience, I make sure that people understand this very, very, very stark problem that we have. It's a big deal, and we need to know better about it.
No, 100%. And I appreciate you for shedding a light on it. And it's a sector that I think people need to know more about. Let's just leave it at that. Joshua English, I appreciate you so much for your work. And thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Thank you for asking me on, and maybe we can do it again in the future. 5 years from now.
I look forward to it.
Awesome.
All right. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Joshua.